He was born and raised a Jew in New York, the child of parents who escaped from Hitler. He studied Judaism under three prominent rabbis, considered joining a Hasidic community in Israel, but eventually ended up in Cambridge, where after an exceptional performance at MIT and Harvard, he was asked to join the faculty of the Harvard Business School. Then he began to have visions. One day while walking along the beach in Cape Cod, he fell into heaven. He had a mystical encounter with an anonymous God. After encountering God, he longed to know his name. Let me know your name. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan. I don't mind if you're Krishna and I have to become a Hindu. As long as you are not Christ and I have to become a Christian. 1 year to the day after his first religious experience on Cape Cod, Roy Schumann had a dream during which he encountered the Blessed Virgin. He started attending Mass and was baptized shortly thereafter. Salvation is from the Jews. That's our focus.
Roy, I'm so glad, this is really a privilege for Focus to be able to be here at Betania too and talk with you, because you and I have been in many conferences together, but we actually haven't been able to sit down one-on-one. And your testimony is one of the ones that really zinged me, and I could relate to it a whole lot. And I think it's kind of unique that we're on the grounds here at Betania too, which is where I had no idea that you had been here before, and you said, I used to come here when it was just nothing but a little stream.
Yeah, stream in the woods, when it first started, stuff started happening here, and priests used to come here on the day off, charismatic priests, and lead little prayer services in the woods and stuff,
Who knows God's ways that we would end up here?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great.
Just seeing you out there, and then we both have a relationship with this place, and never knew. And I never mentioned Betania to you. You never mentioned it to me.
That's right.
And then we end up here. So I'm kind of like one of those people that really when we speak at a conference and they want to introduce us and they tell your whole story in the beginning, and then you well, you just heard it in the whole introduction, so I'm not going to be that way. So it's the thing that's amazing to me is that you were, and I was always fascinated that you were actually a Hasidic Jew.
Well, I had flirted with Hasidism. It's not fair to say that I truly was.
Did you have curls at one time, though?
No, I didn't have curls.
Oh, you didn't have curls?
I didn't have curls.
Oh, okay.
I spent about 3 months as a kind of disciple of a Hasidic rabbi.
Okay.
But it wasn't long enough to either grow the curls or call myself truly a Hasid. But I guess you're kind of inviting me just to start at the beginning.
Yeah, that you were deep into your faith at a young age.
That's right. The Jewish faith, of course.
That's right, the Jewish faith.
The story, in some sense, starts with my parents. My parents are both German Jewish, refugees from Hitler's Germany. My father left Germany shortly after Hitler came to power. There was a short period when he was trying to get all of the Jews to leave, as long as they didn't take anything with them, and left everything behind. My mother was less fortunate. Her family fled to France, which didn't last long, of course. And she was actually at one point arrested and put on a train going to Auschwitz. But she escaped while the train was still in France and made it to the United States. And my parents met and married in the United States. They lived in a suburb of New York City. And so my whole time growing up, I was not only very Jewish and quite devoutly Jewish, but I also had the whole kind of Holocaust refugee chip on my shoulder about, the evil Christians and this evil Christianity and this tremendous oppressive, persecuting weight that I thought of as coming from Christianity. Sort of that Christianity was the reason why the Jews had been kind of put through hell for the last 2,000 years.
I think I'd feel the same way if my mother had once been on a train on her way to Auschwitz. I can understand how you...
that's right, and of course they had the mistaken impression that this somehow came from Christianity instead of understanding that it was actually also very anti-Christian.
Correct.
So my whole world growing up was Jewish. I went to Jewish religious education all the way until college. And in fact, my last years of high school, I got more interested or more devoutly involved, and actually became the disciple of a Hasidic rabbi. That's where you started.
Okay.
And lived with him and traveled with him in Israel for the summer between high school and college. and toyed with the idea of not coming back to the United States and starting college in the fall, but staying in Israel and joining essentially a Jewish religious community in Jerusalem and living a life of prayer and religious study. But I didn't do that. I came back to the United States and started university that fall. That was MIT. And I lost.
Ooh, you're a smart one. Most Jews people are very smart.
I'll leave that uncommented on.
Or they think they are.
But anyway, yeah, I went to MIT, and I lost my faith pretty much at MIT under the influence of two things. One is the kind of pseudoscientific secular worldview that, religion was a medieval superstition before people had science. Now we know that science is all the answers, so we don't have to believe in those myths anymore. That's not actually a scientific view. They say it's scientific.
That's why you call it pseudo.
It's pseudoscientific because the essence of science is you examine the evidence and you build your theories on the basis of the evidence. And if the evidence contradicts your theory, you have to throw out the theory and start with a new one. You don't throw out the evidence because it contradicts your theory. Now all of the evidence is for the faith. And I know that your show does a lot of this, but not only is there the evidence, so to speak, of witness testimonies, which one could argue are subjective, but you have all this physical evidence of the faith. You have the medical miracles. You have your medical miracle at Medjugorje. You have all of the medical miracles at Lourdes, which are attested to by a scientific panel of doctors. I think no more than 1/3 of them are allowed to be Catholic, and 1/3 of them have to be, I think, atheists or have no faith. And there has to be physical proof of the condition before the healing, after the healing, no natural explanation.
No medical explanation.
No natural.
Spontaneous.
Spontaneous. It has to be almost instantaneous. It has to be unreversed. And so forth, and there are hundreds of them. You have the miracle at Fatima of the sun spinning in the sky and falling to the earth that was seen by 80,000, 100,000 people, including communists and atheists and stuff. You have tons of physical evidence of the faith. So the scientific view would be, whoops, what do we do with this evidence? We better get a theory that encompasses the evidence, and of course the Catholic faith does encompass the evidence, but they don't do that. They say this can't be true, so we'll throw out the evidence because our theory that there is no God or that there is no spirituality has to be right. So that's why I call it a pseudoscientific.
And that's,
I apologize for the digression, but
no,
so,
I want that.
Okay.
I want that because that is what our world is happening
so
more and more. And
excuse me, it's so stupid.
Yeah.
It's really, really, really stupid. And the thing is, it's the one advantage of going to MIT is that I have a true sense of what science is. So it's easy for me to see this fake science, which is all over the place. And when the faith is attacked, it's usually on the basis of fake science. It can't be attacked on the basis of science because there's one truth, and the truth encompasses science, and the truth encompasses the faith. So anyway, but I lost my faith at MIT largely from that, but also because I fell into sin. And as our histories are not that different.
That's right.
The saying is sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
That's right. Flower in your hair and love in your heart.
You know, that's, I think, when most people lose their faith. It's basically has to do with being in a state of mortal sin. So anyway, by the time I got out of MIT, I was essentially, I don't know, agnostic or atheist. I went on to Harvard Business School, and I did pretty well there.
Went into marketing, didn't you?
Yeah, I got my MBA and was immediately invited back to join the faculty as a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School. Yeah, okay, maybe I was reasonably smart.
You are very smart. That's why it's so important to this. It is how God uses people, you know, because here's somebody who is like so smart, thought he had all the answers, you know, went to MIT, this and that, and look where you find yourself today. But actually, he was working way back in your life, and that's where I want you to go. But you know,
yeah, it is beautiful.
Jewish people are very smart marketers.
Well, one of the reasons I do all of this whole shtick of running around, we'll talk about it more later, but of giving my witness testimony in the books I've written and stuff, is to encourage Jewish entry into the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Because I think that the Jews have a lot to bring to the faith. And not only is it a great gift for the Jews to know their Jewish Messiah, who is Jesus, and his church, which he left behind, but it's also actually a gift to the church.
Well, you know, I just want to stop for 1 second and tell you, I heard this great story, and it made me think of you. That because I knew that you went into marketing. And I thought, wow, that's like perfect, because Jewish people are great marketers. I mean, that's fact, you know. And now, depending on what they're marketing, you know, I know you don't want to go before God and say, hey, remember me, 1,000,001 salad shooters? You know, I sold 1,000,001 salad shooters or something like that. But I heard this great story. Then it says that there was 2 beggars sitting on the steps in St. Peter's Square, and sitting on the steps, and one beggar had a big basket and he held a huge cross, and sitting right down from him was another beggar, and he had a huge Star of David and a big basket. And as the people passed through St. Peter's Square, they were all putting money into the basket with the cross, and the poor beggar that held the Star of David was getting nothing. And finally, this priest that had gone several days, had back and forth and worked within the Vatican, he kept passing and kept seeing these beggars, and finally he couldn't stand it anymore. He felt so bad for the beggar with the Star of David that he went up to him and he said, sir, he said, may I tell you something? He said, you are in the most Catholic Christian part of the world. You are in Rome, you are at the Vatican, this is the seat of the papacy. And the people are going to give to the cross every time. They're not going to give to the Star of David. And day after day you sit here, and at this point he stops and he looks over at the guy with the cross and he says, Mohish, look who's trying to teach the Goldstein brothers how to market. It's good.
It's good. It's good. Yeah. So I did go into marketing. So I became a professor of marketing at the ripe old age of, I think it was 29, at Harvard Business School. And that's really the beginning of my witness testimony per se, because what had been going on was all my life since I was a small child, I knew there had to be a real meaning and purpose to life. And I thought that someday when I was older, I would come into the real meaning and purpose of life. And as a small child, I thought it had to do with knowing God and living for God. And I honestly thought that at my bar mitzvah, which is the ceremony when the boy is 13 years of age, it's sort of like the Catholic confirmation, I thought the veil would drop and I would enter into a personal relationship with God, and that would be the meaning of my life. And but then my bar mitzvah came, and the day came and went, and that hadn't happened. And it was actually, as a result, one of the saddest days of my childhood. But then pretty soon I decided the real meaning of life would come when I got a driver's license, or when I got a girlfriend, or when I left home, or if I got into MIT, or if I got into Harvard Business School, or when I began my career, or whatever. But here I was already more successful in worldly terms than I ever expected to be, being a professor at Harvard Business School. And yet life still had no meaning or purpose. And so I really fell into the worst depression of my life, a kind of existential despair, because there was no longer anything I could look forward to that held the promise of giving my life meaning, because I already had the brass ring.
Very profound.
But there still was no purpose to anything. We were just a chemical accident. You know, lightning had hit this muddy soup and started life, and there was no rhyme or reason or purpose to anything, and we lived for 60 or 80 years, and then we die, and that's it, and there's no sense to anything. And so it was really this pretty dark period. And it was in that state, I was walking in nature early one morning. I was on Cape Cod in the low pine woods behind the sand dunes in a nature preserve where there was no one around. I was just lost in my thoughts. And I received the most spectacular grace of my life. From one moment to the next, the veil between earth and heaven dropped, and I found myself in the presence of God, very knowingly in the presence of God, seeing my life as though I had died, and was looking back over my life in the presence of God. And I saw in an instant how I would feel about everything after I died. And I saw what I would be happy about and what I would wish I had done differently. I saw that my 2 greatest regrets when I died would be, number 1, all of the time and energy I had wasted worrying about not being loved, when every moment of my existence was held in an ocean of love, greater than I ever imagined could exist, coming from this all-knowing, all-loving God. And the other great regret would be every hour that I wasted doing nothing of value in the eyes of heaven. Remember, I was trained in selfishness. I was a professor of marketing at Harvard Business School. I thought of everything in terms of cost-benefit analysis and maximizing net present value and everything. And here I realized all of a sudden that is as though I were a child playing for Monopoly money when I could have been playing for real gold coins. And if I wanted to be smart and selfish, the only thing that made sense would be to try to essentially accumulate as much riches in heaven as possible, to work for things that would matter 100 million years from now, rather than putting all of this time and energy into working for things that wouldn't do me any good at all 60 or 80 or 100 years from now when I was dead. I could be working for things that would be, benefiting me. I know that's an awfully selfish way of looking at it, but literally benefiting me 100 million years from now for all eternity. I saw that all my life I had kind of been looking back over my life as though I were, looking in a rearview mirror, saying to myself, oh, if only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. If only that hadn't happened, then I would be happy today. And that nothing could be further from the truth, that everything that had ever happened to me had been the most perfect thing that could have been arranged, coming from the hands of an all-knowing, all-loving God.
I just want to stop you right there, because I think, and I've heard you say this before, and I think that is one of the most profound graces that you were given. Because if people only knew that even their sufferings are when they are growing the most. Now, the saints have told us that and all this and that, and say, yeah, easy for you to say, you're not, but you actually had confirmation of this.
Yes, I
and it
saw
was
it.
given to you, and you saw it.
I saw it. I saw that not only had everything that had ever happened to me been the most perfect thing that could have been arranged, including the things that I thought were the greatest catastrophes at the time, the things that had caused the most suffering, but it was especially those things that had been the most, especially the things which had caused the most suffering, had been the most perfect thing that could have been happening to me at that time.
What a grace, huh?
Yes, but it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't help, but in other words, I still have the same problems everyone else has when it actually happens. It's sort of like, why me, God, why me?
Yeah, we're human.
Yeah. So it's not like it produces an instantaneous transformation in the soul, but I can look back on the experience and remind myself of it. Padre Pio said, if we only knew the true value of suffering, we would never pray for anything else. So I saw the single most overwhelming aspect of this experience was seeing how God knew me and loved me personally by name, as though I were the only person he had ever created, as though I were the reason for all of creation. Not only had he been controlling everything that happened to me at every moment of my life, and he was caring about how I felt at every moment of my life, and in some sense saddened by everything that had made me sad, and some sense happy at every moment that something made me happy, as though I were the only person in all of creation. Of course, I knew when this was happening that the meaning and purpose of my life was to worship and serve this Lord and Master and God who was revealing himself to me. But what I didn't know was what his name was and what religion to follow. I couldn't think of this as the God of the Old Testament, the God of Judaism. Now, I know now that it was. But in all honesty, if one reads the Old Testament, the picture of God that emerges is of a God much more distant and judgmental and severe than this God who is showing himself to me. And in fact, in the days of the Old Testament, God did not reveal himself to the hoi polloi, to the ordinary people. They related to God through the priests and through the prophets and through the patriarchs, but they weren't allowed to address God directly. The picture of this that I have is when Moses was going to go up on Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments, God told him before he went up to build a fence around the base of the mountain to keep any of the people from approaching the base of the mountain. And if they did, they'd have to be immediately killed because of the sacrilege of even touching the base of the mountain while God was on top. So this was my picture of, the God of Judaism. So I prayed on the spot to know his name, so I would know how to worship and serve him properly. I remember, I was still walking at the time, actually. I remember walking along and praying, let me know your name so I know what religion to follow. I don't mind if you're Buddha and I have to become Buddhist. I don't mind if you're Apollo and I have to become a Roman pagan. I don't mind if you're Christian and I have to become Hindu, as long as you're not Christ and I have to become Christian. And I literally...
God has a sense of humor, doesn't he?
I was literally praying this. So he respected that prayer, and he didn't tell me his name at the time. But I went back. I went back home to Cambridge, where I was living at the time, happy for the first time since childhood. I knew it was all true. I knew we lived forever. I knew there was never any reason to be anxious about anything. That was a huge difference. I knew that there was a reason to be good. This is something else that had always bothered me. Both as an atheist and also, frankly, even as a Jew, is that you want to be good, right? And you want to do good deeds, and you have this impulse inside, but especially once you're an atheist, there's no reason to be good. It doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it.
Right.
And now I knew, of course, there was an infinite logic to be as good as you could possibly be at every moment. And I was happy for the first time since childhood, and all I wanted to do was pursue this experience and, follow it wherever it led. Now, I didn't know where to go with this. Now, it had been a mystical experience, and I didn't know anything. I had been essentially atheist since MIT days, since college days. You have a mystical experience. What do you do if you want to find out more?
You can't go home and look in the yellow pages and look up mystic.
No,
mystic.
well, I did something like that. I went to find a mystic to talk to, hoping that he could shed light on this experience. And I had one of the jobs I had worked at, there was a temp guy supporting himself as a temp typist who I knew was a self-styled mystic. So I called him up and made an appointment to go over and see him, hoping that he could shed some light on this experience.
Yes.
And he was into all kinds of New Age stuff. He was into some Hindu-based meditation group and everything. And I went over to his house for an evening and thinking that he could tell me what this was all about. And instead, he just filled my head with all this stuff and gave me all these very unhealthy books to read and actually put me on a path, a kind of a New Agey path that it took me some months to get out of. But one good thing happened that evening when I went over to talk to him, which is he was actually a fallen away Catholic.
Okay.
And there was a point in the evening when he went into the kitchen to get us some tea, and I was alone in his living room, and on his coffee table there was this big coffee table picture book called something like The 100 Greatest Miracles of Modern Times. And when he was in the kitchen getting the tea, I'm leafing through the book, and my eyes fall on a page dedicated to the miracle at Fatima. Now, this is the first time I had ever heard of the miracle at Fatima. Here I had been, I think, spent 23 years in school.
Yes.
Was obviously reasonably smart and had never even heard of Fatima. So here I'm reading about how the sun danced in the sky and crashed to the earth and seen by 80,000, 100,000 people. And my mind's exploding, right? And my friend comes back from the kitchen with the tea, and I point to that page and I say, "Is this true? Did this really happen?" And he says, "Oh, yes." And then my next question is, has anyone else ever heard of it?
I love that.
And he said, "Oh yeah, Catholics know about this." Then my next question was, has anything else been written about this?
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh yeah, just go to the local library. You'll find a dozen books on Fatima." Well, my initial reaction was I was filled with furious indignation. I felt my whole life had been different if someone had told me about this as a child. My whole time growing up, when I was going through Jewish religious education, my constant question to my teachers was, why did God used to perform miracles in the days of the Old Testament and no longer performs miracles? And then quit.
It seems like he quits.
And I felt like my whole life would have been different if I knew that miracles still happen and that God was still active in the world. And I felt indignant. How dare they have kept this from me? How dare they have kept this a secret? So I guess I tell this story in part to evangelize Catholics, because they don't know what they have. First of all, they don't know what they have with the faith, and I mean, if they knew frankly the misery that everybody else lives in, especially non-Christians, but even non-Catholic Christians, by not having what the Catholic has through the sacraments and through the catechism, they
just pick up a Baltimore Catechism book?
I would have given my right arm to know the content of the Baltimore Catechism book. All the time I'm getting these higher degrees, from MIT and Harvard Business School and stuff.
Right.
Why did God? Who is God? Why did He make us?
Yes.
What's the meaning of life?
Yeah.
I was just dying to know that stuff. And
exactly.
the Catholics get it with their, porridge, when they're 4 years old.
That's right.
And they also have the miracles. And again, I mean, I don't think they really realize this, but I think Catholics grow up, I mean, they know about the apparitions of Mary, they know about these things, and boy, but other people don't.
Exactly.
And if you know that, I mean, I know that most people don't have the gift that I was given in like this personal encounter with God. But any Catholic who takes the faith seriously knows that God is active in the world, if only through the miracles, if only through the apparitions. They know that God has not abandoned us and not left us with this 3,000-year-old dusty book and nothing else to go on.
Well, I want to interject that that is so true, and that's part of my mantra when I talk, is that I came from no organized religion at all, okay? And then when this happened to me, I knew immediately that God exists, that the Blessed Mother exists, and that there was, and I was on the wrong road, and the Blessed Mother kind of led me to that. And when I found out about the Catholic faith, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really real.
It's all here.
It's real.
Yeah.
And I felt like, don't you guys know what you have? Because they grow up with it, it kind of becomes mundane. It's like you said, they get it with their porridge, this and this and that. And that's why, if you really look at what's happening today, when the outpouring of God's mercy and everything, there is a lot of converts. And I know you don't call yourself a convert because I think you have a special gift of coming from Jewish roots, which you feel is like the Jewish roots, and then Catholicism is the next chapter. It's the next phase of it. So God moved you along, right, I think, in the right way. He just took me from nothing and threw me in, but he threw me in, thank God, into the right faith. And I just want people to, and when I go out and speak, say, okay, you don't know what you have here. You don't know what you have. It's absolutely life-changing. And I'm like that too. Like, go out, I'll sit in the airport sometimes and somebody will pass by and I'll go, God, do for that person what you did for me. Then I think to myself, well, maybe I should help out. Maybe I ought to go up to them and tell them, hey, And so that's my big thing. It's like, if only somebody would have invited, like I had a grandmother and she wanted to go to Mass, and she was Lutheran, but she loved to go to Mass. And I asked this friend of mine, I said, did you ever ask her to join the church? She said, no, I never did. And that's my one thing to people. Go out and ask them to come. Because if you just get them to the church and they get to Mass, the people kind of see, and I asked my grandmother, I said, why did you like to go to Mass? And she said, well, because every time I had a heavy problem, I would go to a Catholic church and sit in there, and I could feel a presence. Well, she was feeling the Eucharist in there. And if we could get these people, and we can't be ashamed to go out and see. And I have to say, other Protestant faiths and everything, they'll go out there and say, have you heard the word of the Lord? But somehow we kind of shy away from that, And I think that's what you're doing in a wonderful way when you go out like this, coming from being a Jewish professor to a Catholic evangelist, and you're not afraid to go up to somebody because hey, you're adding up some frequent flyer miles up there. You putting some chips in there.
Yeah, there are a couple of other reasons, I guess. I don't know if I'm not afraid is quite the right word, but one is, I'll tell you what I am afraid of. I'm afraid, and we're all going to pass before Jesus in judgment, right? Whether it's all together at the final judgment or when we die in our particular judgment.
That's right.
And we are going to have our life reviewed in front of us. And I'll tell you what I'm really afraid of, which is he's going to show me, that airplane trip where I was sitting next to somebody and I kind of was too shy, there was an opportunity to say something, but I didn't. And that I was the one chance they had to not go to hell. And because I was afraid of being embarrassed or of them thinking I was some kind of a kook, I kept my mouth shut and they were lost. And he's going to point to that, and that's going to be on me.
Or sometimes we're afraid we're going to make somebody angry. They're a good friend of ours, and we're afraid to say something to them because we're going to make them angry. And if God's going to show us that and say, oh, I was afraid that was going to make them angry, but really probably I would have maybe planted a seed. Even if they got mad, I would have planted the seed, and he would have said, well, at least you tried. Because and that's it's an old saying, but we might be the only Jesus they see today.
Well, we may be the only opportunity they have.
That's what I mean.
To actually end up in the right place.
Yeah,
and that's something to really be scared about.
Yeah, that's something to really think about.
And fear of human respect is, it cost John the Baptist his head, right?
Right.
And you can even think of the crowd that yelled, crucify him and crucify him. A fear of human respect is a really, really dangerous thing. And the enemy is always there, whispering in our ear. And I think one of his favorite things is like when we have an opportunity presented by the Holy Spirit to do some good and to kind of introduce something to somebody, he's going to be there. We know he's going to be there whispering, oh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to seem triumphalistic. They're going to think you're a nut, or they're going to take offense and get angry. That whispering's going to be going on.
Absolutely.
So when you hear that, you ought to be awfully suspicious.
Put your antenna up and say,
Put your antenna up.
Yeah.
And it's really odd. It happened to me actually just last week. I was on a transatlantic flight. There was a Jewish woman sitting next to me. And I was a little bit embarrassed. I told her the whole thing. I gave her my witness testimony and stuff. And I kept saying, tell me if you want me to stop, because I'll stop, because I know you can't move. The flight's full, I don't want to, But she said, no, go on. And by the end of the flight, she was saying to me, what can I do to get to know God in my own life? And she was a hardcore atheist, actually. She was actually very modern in her thinking.
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is at least see if they get mad first. Don't assume they're going to get mad.
That's right. Right.
So,
let's do something here. I'm so overwhelmed that you had that one experience that nobody would think that happened in a lifetime, but actually then you have another experience.
Yeah. What happened was I came back to Cambridge. I didn't know where to go with this. I went on some stupid paths that this mystic had put me on. But every night before going to sleep, I would say a short prayer that I had made up to know the name of my Lord and Master and God.
What was the prayer? What would you say?
That's essentially it, to know the name of my Lord and Master and God would reveal himself to me.
Okay.
And just let me know your name. And a year to the day after the first experience, I know it was a year to the day because I remember praying before going to sleep in Thanksgiving for what had happened a year earlier. I felt as though I were woken by a hand gently on my shoulder and led to a room and left alone with the most beautiful young woman I could ever imagine. And I knew without being told that it was the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Were you scared?
No, I wasn't scared. I was in love. I was in love like
I'm asking
I've
that
never
because
been
everyone
before
who's
since.
ever had a thing say it is the most overwhelming thing of love.
That's pure love.
they
Just
have
pure
ever
love.
felt.
Yeah, it's pure love. To be in her presence, to feel the love flowing from her, was actually to be in a state of perfect sustained ecstasy, such as I never imagined could exist. Yeah. Anyway, when I found myself in her presence, all I wanted to do was throw myself on my knees and somehow honor her appropriately. And the first thought that crossed my mind was, oh my gosh, I wish I at least knew the Hail Mary. So I could honor her somehow. But I didn't. And the first thing she said to me was she offered to answer any questions that I had for her.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So my first thought was to ask her to teach me the Hail Mary, but I was
He's going to come in the back door, huh?
I was too proud. Yeah, I was too proud to admit that I didn't know it. So instead, I asked her, "What's your favorite prayer to you?" as a kind of backdoor way of, getting her to tell me. And her first answer was a little bit coy. It was, "I love all prayers," to me. But I was a bit pushy. Maybe that's because I was a New York Jew, and maybe not. But I said, "But you must love some prayers to you more than others." And she relented and she recited a prayer, but it was in Portuguese, and I didn't know any Portuguese.
She is coy.
So all I could do was make the effort to remember the first few syllables phonetically, and the next morning when I woke up, I wrote them down phonetically. And then later, when I met a Portuguese Catholic woman, I asked her to recite all of the Marian prayers in Portuguese so that I could identify it.
Catch that one.
And to the best of my ability, I identified it as, "O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee."
And that was it.
And that was it. And now I knew when she was saying it, that she was saying it in Portuguese, in part as a reflection of a certain childlike trust in Mary that the Portuguese people had still maintained more than many others.
Well, and also, wouldn't that be too, because it might have been because Fatima.
Yeah,
you had such
absolutely.
an interest in Fatima,
Absolutely.
and Fatima is in Portugal.
Yeah.
So she's very coy.
Yeah.
Really, when you think about it, it was Fatima that hooked you.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm going to give you this prayer in Portuguese.
Which is, yeah, I think so. I think that was an aspect too. And of course, that prayer is from another apparition of hers to
absolutely.
to
Catherine
Rue de
Labouré.
Bach, St. Catherine Labouré. The miraculous medal. It's the prayer that's around
And I
the
notice
edge
you,
of the.
you wear it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So then I asked her about 4 or 5 other questions. Of course, I wish I had that chance again.
Oh, yeah.
I might have some, I don't want to say better questions, but certainly have some more questions. But a lot of this experience, a lot of both experiences had, there were things spoken to me, but there was also a lot of infused knowledge. In that initial experience of Christ, one of the neatest parts about that experience was that I could not hold a thought in my mind without being presented with the answer. It was like I had this searchlight in the center of my forehead, and wherever I turned, it was illumined with the answer. Yeah, it was really neat. By the way,
You know why I'm looking at you like that is of course, this is going to sound like I'm Captain Kangaroo next to you, being this big professor and everything. But what happened to me was, after I had this miracle happen to me, and I came back, and I wanted to become Catholic, you could say I have the worst memory. I mean, I'm taking Ginkgo Bokla and Boca Ginkgo and everything that's supposed to help your memory. But you could say a prayer one time, and I was like a sponge. And there was a period in which I went into any prayer that they said, from the Magnificat to no matter what prayer it was. One time. Just one time I heard it, and it was in there, and I knew it. And it was like amazing. And then it stopped. And I said, then one day somebody started playing the Angelus, and I said, I don't know that one. Why didn't I get that one? Why didn't somebody teach me that one at that time? And I was angry because, and to this day, I have a hard time remembering the Angelus. It's simple, but I have a hard time. But I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like, you got it? Okay, now the rest of it is on your own. I don't know if that happened to you, because it was like, this much, the rest, this much I give you, the rest.
Well, at the time, it was anything I put in my mind, any question I held in my mind or occurred to me, I was given the answer. It was
do you
kind
still
of
have that now?
Oh, no.
That's what I'm saying.
The experience faded. One thing back then about the experience fading is when this was happening, this earlier experience, on the beach or whatever, I was not surprised it was happening. I was not surprised that I was seeing heaven. I was not surprised I was seeing the angelic hierarchies. I was not surprised that I had God with me as though as though he were a foot away. All I was surprised was that I could ever have been blind to it. And I never thought the experience would end, because I wasn't amazed that this was happening. I was amazed, how could I have not seen it?
Yes.
It was so much realer than the physical world. It was as though the physical world was like a painted veil, just this gossamer veil
what you're talking about.
With pictures painted on it. And sometimes I've been at the theater where they've done this at the beginning of a ballet or something. Yeah. They'll have the curtain with a picture on it and the lights on the curtain, and the curtain will be opaque.
Yes.
And then they'll turn off those lights and light the stage behind it, and all of a sudden you see through the curtain as though it's not there, and you see the stage behind it.
Well, I know exactly, because the experience that I had was that there's no words to try to explain it. Like you said, well, it's like being at a play. And to me, I couldn't find in my vocabulary how to explain it. The best way I could explain it, it was like I had been in a fog. And all of a sudden the fog lifted, and everything was very bright and very real. And it was like, this was here all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
And this was going on all the time, and I was in a fog.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I couldn't imagine the experience ending. And I never thought it would end, but of course it did end. But I'll go back to the experience of Mary. By the way, let me say, in kind of full disclosure, I know now that the right way to describe it is as a dream. I know that it was not an in-body experience. I know that if there was a camera in the room, it would show me asleep in
sleeping,
bed.
right.
I experienced it as though I were awake. At the time, I thought I was awake. My memory presents it as a waking experience.
Right.
I've never had a dream where I remember the feeling of standing there weighing different questions in my mind. What about this question? What about that question?
Right.
So all of that presents it as though I were fully awake and conscious, but I know that it wasn't in the normal sense. I mean, it was in the normal sense a dream. So that she offered to answer any questions. I told you the first question. I'll maybe mention another couple of questions
Please
and
do.
answers. Let me say, before I go on, that as incredibly beautiful as she was, and as perfectly beautiful as she was, even more moving than her appearance of beauty was the sound of her voice. The beauty of her voice, I'd like to say musicality, but that's not doing it justice, because it's like what makes music was in her voice, only much more than it is in music.
Oh my.
And the way her voice would just go through me and like lift me up into an ecstasy, just from the love flowing through her voice.
Yeah.
And the beauty
Music
of her
has
voice.
the ability to do that to us. No matter what mood we're in, it can lift us.
Yeah.
So that's a very nice way to put that. It's a beautiful way to put it.
The beauty in her voice is even more overwhelming than her physical beauty. So I guess another question that I remember asking, it was more of an exclamation than a question, because I was just so not paralyzed, but just so overwhelmed by her grandeur and her beauty and her love and her glory, that I kind of stammered out, how is it possible? How can it be? How can it be that you're so glorious, that you're so magnificent, that you're so exalted? How can it be? And she just looked down at me sort of pityingly and shook her head gently, and she said, oh no, you don't understand. You don't understand anything. I'm nothing. I'm a creature. I'm a created thing. He's everything.
Wow. Whew.
And then by now I figured out that it had been Christ on the beach, and this was all about Christianity, and I better get up to speed pretty quick. And all my life I had heard the expression, the Holy Spirit, but I had no idea what it meant.
Exactly.
So I apologize for the way I phrased the question, but I had no idea of what the Holy Spirit meant. So I asked her, again, I apologize, what's this business about the Holy Spirit? And her reply was just to look upwards with an expression melting with love and say, he's his gaze.
Wow.
Yeah, and a number of years later, when I told my witness testimony to some seminarians, they pointed out that St. Thomas Aquinas had called the Holy Spirit the look of love that passes between the Father and the Son.
Well, let me tell you, I had someone tell me that is very knowledgeable and is in some ways a mystic, and I was asking them to explain to me, what's the Holy Spirit? I mean, is it just like air around us, or is it really a bird, or what is the Holy Spirit? And so to put it to me to bring the cookies to a lower shelf, let's say, for me, it was explained, okay, a picture God, and he holds up a hand mirror, and he's looking in the hand mirror, and there's that area between the hand mirror and God.
That's interesting.
And that is the Holy Spirit. So now when you use the word gaze,
yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, I'm telling you, I've got goosebumps.
Yeah,
that's very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's interesting. That's worth my thinking about. I had never heard that before. Again, I mean, most of these questions were coming out of just how overwhelmed I was being in her presence. So I asked her, what's your favorite title for yourself? Because I want to know how to honor her, right? And
you really did ask some good questions.
I know,
though.
but I'm not telling you really bad ones. I asked some bad ones too that I don't.
But you really did ask some good ones.
Don't tell. And she said, I'm the beloved daughter of the Father, mother of the Son, and spouse of the Spirit. Now, I didn't know anything about Christianity at this time. I didn't know anything about the Blessed Virgin Mary. This stuff was all completely out of left field to me. I mean, I know that a normal Catholic.
But you see, that's how, like, this is real, because you couldn't have made that up. I mean, just like when she answered that question, like, I am a created creature. He is. I mean, you couldn't have made that up.
I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything.
That's what lends it so much credibility. Now, if some priest would have had this dream and said this,
Yeah.
we'd say, well, you know,
Yeah.
he might have read that somewhere from some
Yeah.
saint, you know.
The
But-
only thing I knew about the Virgin Mary before this experience was from the song Silent Night.
Yeah.
And that line, round young virgin,
Yeah.
I thought it referred to her being pregnant and her being round. And that was
I
it.
love that.
So anyway, I asked her about another couple of questions. Some were really dumb. And then she said she had something she wanted to talk to me about.
Uh-oh.
And she spoke to me, and it's not an uh-oh.
Oh, okay.
She spoke to me for about another 10 or 12 minutes. There's a veil over that. I have a sense of that, what she was speaking about, but I don't have the word-for-word memory that I have of the questions and
It was
answers.
probably because it was for you.
Yes, and also actually, I don't know how these things work, but it was, I don't want to say it was a time bomb, but it was things for the rest of my life to be brought to the surface when needed over the
okay.
course of the rest of my life.
Okay.
It was kind of planted in a funny way.
Kind of
where-
time release.
That time release, that's right, that's a better expression, it's time release. And then the audience was over. And I went back to sleep, and the next morning when I woke up, I knew that it had been Christ in the initial experience. I knew that this was all about Christianity, and I wanted nothing but to be as fully and completely a Christian as possible. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant was. I had kept myself really willfully ignorant of Christianity up till this point my whole life. I never opened a New Testament. I mean, I knew virtually nothing. And all I could do was open the local phone book and find a church to go to, which is a Protestant church. But as soon as I felt a little bit comfortable with the pastor, I kind of shyly asked him, what about the Blessed Virgin Mary? And when he answered without the respect that I knew was due her, I knew this is no place for
wrong
me.
place.
Wrong place. And the other thing that was happening in those days was I was spending all my free time hanging out at Marian shrines, just to feel her presence, just to walk the grounds and kind of commune with her. And there was, and of course, the Marian shrines were held by the Catholic Church.
Right.
And very often when I'd be there would be a Mass going on. And whenever I was around a Mass going on, I really wanted to receive communion, even though I didn't know what it was. It was just like, gimme, gimme, gimme. It was really greedy to get that. And
Isn't that amazing?
So those are the two things that kind of led me fairly directly into the Catholic Church, was knowing who the Blessed Virgin Mary is and wanting to receive communion.
See, I think that's your experience with Mary is kind of like what I felt like. Although when I was in Medjugorje, I knew that God existed and the Blessed Mother existed, and the Blessed Mother was like leading me to her Son, and that's how I got led to the Catholic Church. But it's amazing how she leads us in a way that is, who knows the ways of the Lord and who knows her ways, but she has this way where she always leads you to the Son. She always brings you, and for a long time there was Marian conferences, and then you could see it taken on where it became Eucharistic conferences, and she led people come, and then eventually people learned more to appreciate the Eucharist and everything, and that's really what Mary does. She leads you to her Son, and people say, oh, you worship Mary, or you do this and that. If they only knew that she just wants you to go to her Son and receive all these graces.
I would actually amplify that a little bit in two ways. One is there is a very mysterious, mystical union or unity between Mary and the Catholic Church. It's like where you find Mary, you find the Catholic Church, and where you find the Catholic Church, you find Mary. And I think it was Saint Bernard of Clairvaux who said essentially that where you find Mary, there are no heresies. In other words, there's something about the way Mary leads you that protects you from going on a wrong path.
I agree.
And without Mary, if you want to find Jesus on your own, there are a lot of wrong paths out there.
Right. That's right. That's very true. And thank God when she takes you by the hand like that and leads you directly to
I think she used a 2x4 a little later in my conversion, but anyway, so when I entered the Catholic Church, very, very, very gratefully, I was a little bit surprised when I'd hate to do this, but I know because this is going to have to be edited out, but were you saying this? Were you? Oh, I'm sorry, because I saw your hand go something like that.
No, we got about 10 more minutes.
Okay. Sorry about that. You'll
That's
have to
okay,
edit.
no problem.
When I entered the Catholic Church really gratefully, incredibly gratefully, I was a little surprised when I would come across these cradle Catholics who would kind of throw open their arms and say, "Welcome to our church." Because I couldn't help thinking that if the Catholic faith is true, it should be me throwing open my arms saying, "Welcome to my church," because the Catholic Church is nothing but the continuation of Judaism after the coming of the Jewish Messiah. That all of Judaism was about preparing the way for the incarnation of the second person of the Most Holy Trinity as a man, and for the propagation of the faith after that point. And all of salvation history, and you alluded to this in the beginning, all of salvation history is essentially divided in two. The pivot point, the fulcrum, is the incarnation, and the period before that incarnation leading up to it is Judaism, the ultimate relationship between God and man. And the entire intention of Judaism, though, wasn't to hold that relationship between God and man for the Jewish people as an ethnic group, but to, with the incarnation, make it available to all of mankind through the sacraments of the Catholic Church and through faith in Jesus. So it's really one story of salvation history in phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 being the preparatory stage, the gestational phase or whatever, like the child in the womb until it's ready to be born, and that was Judaism. And then from birth onward until the second coming, until the end of time, it is the faith of the Catholic Church and the sacraments of the Catholic Church. And this is all one story. And
you're right. But you know, so many people have trouble linking that together.
Yeah, they don't see it.
So I'm gonna catch you on camera right now, and I'm gonna ask you and press you that, can we get you back and you do a show about that?
Oh,
with
sure.
us?
I wrote a 400-page book about it, 350-page book about it too, you know. Salvation is from the Jews, the role of Judaism in salvation history from Abraham to the second coming.
Right. Well, we got to get you to do that.
So absolutely, and when I tell this story, and that's a lot of what I do, as you know nowadays, is going around to conferences and parishes and stuff, and I tell my witness testimony, but I also tell the story of the role of Judaism in salvation history. And it's quite a surprise to me how it is faith building for Catholics. I mean, you know this frustration too, because you're a convert. Nothing is more frustrating to me than to find a Catholic who says, well, I'm Catholic because my family's from Ireland, or I'm Catholic because my parents are Catholic and my grandparents are Catholic. That's not why one is Catholic. One's Catholic because it is the truth, and it is the relationship between God and man, and it is the fullest part. It is the system that God set up for the relationship between God and man, for their life on earth, and for the best possible eternity. You're not Catholic because you're born into it. You shouldn't be Catholic because you're born into it. It's not an ethnic club. It's not like being, you know, from Sicily or being Italian or being Jewish or something.
Right.
It is the universal relationship between God and man. And when I paint the picture going from the Garden of Eden through Judaism, the Incarnation, and the Catholic Church, it very often opens the eyes of cradle Catholics to the fact that Catholicism isn't about being born into a Catholic family, but is precisely about the relationship between God and man from the Garden of Eden on.
That's why we could do a whole show on that. I mean, you could do hours on it. You could do a series on it, to tell you the truth. But anyway, so when you had this experience, and part of that is kind of like time release capsule, do you find that parts of that come back to you since that? I mean, like these little points that were given to you, and
I definitely, I mean, I was spoiled for a long time, and by now I'd say my prayer life isn't all that different from, you know, an ordinary good Catholic. But for the first few years, my prayer life was still rather, you know, on a very fast track.
yes,
And so there was definitely a progressive unveiling of things. How much of it came from that time release capsule, and how much of it came from continuing effusions of grace, I don't really know.
you said something that's very important, though. You said, you know, I still have problems now. I still have, you know, obviously, like we all have our sufferings and everything. We still have problems and everything. And you said, but at least I have that experience to go back to. There's one thought that I hold on to a whole lot, and that is the picture of The apostles had watched him perform many miracles and everything like that, and they're out in the boat with him, and he's sleeping. And they start, and the storm comes up, and they start freaking out, and they're bailing the water out, and they're putting up the pumps, and they're pumping the water out the boat. They're doing everything they can do, and he's back there sleeping, you know. And they finally say, "Look, you know, don't you care that we're drowning here? Don't you care? Don't you see us? We've done everything possible, and we're drowning." And he says, "You know, why do you fear? Why do you this and that?" And then he just stops the rain, and he stops the storm, and everything gets calm. And so he's with us in whatever boat we're in right now, and no matter what troubles we're in, he's in the boat. And I think that's what's so wonderful about you, is that you will admit that too. Look, this isn't about me. I'm still me. I still have troubles every day. I'm still going around, but at least it is life-changing, and we know what was once very, very important to us is no longer important. And what was of no worth to us before is incredibly important to us now.
We know that in our head. It still can take some time and work.
Exactly.
Because I still, you know, I in my weaker moments, I still say, oh, if I had stayed as a Harvard Business School professor, look at where I'd be today, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I said that too, you know, if I would have stayed in broadcasting and kept my stuff and did this and did that, you know.
Yeah, so it's a temptation that's always there.
That little thing, like you said, whispering in your ear.
Yeah.
You wanted to work for Jesus? How you like it now, you know? But anyway, how do you find yourself now? And you go around to parishes. Your whole life is a.
First of all, the couple of great things happened in my life since this conversion or experience. The first 10 years. I don't want to discourage anyone, but it's been a long time. It was 87 was the first experience. The first 10 years were really rough because I knew that I was supposed to be doing something, but I had no idea what. And every morning I'd wake up and it's like, God, when are you going to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing in my life? And I just want to spend all my time, you know, praying and in monasteries and charismatic prayer meetings and masses and everything.
Apparition sites.
But, you know, what am I supposed to be doing in my life? And then I was given this book to write, Salvation is from the Jews, the role of Judaism in salvation history from Abraham to the Second Coming. And I was really given that book to write, and I don't have time to go into too much. But, I mean, it came through, I'm not saying it was automatic writing, but the way the thoughts would flow into my head and out through my hands and onto the keyboard.
Well, we're going to make it available through Focus.
Good.
So
well, great.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Well, thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you. God bless.
Thanks.
To order Roy Schumann's book, Salvation is from the Jews, call Focus at 985-635-0333 or visit us on the web at FocusTVOnline.com.
To order a copy of this show or any other Focus production, call 504-840-9898 or 985-635-0333 or visit us on the web at FocusTVOnline.com. Focus would like to thank you for your kind donations. Your gifts and generosity make an immediate difference in the lives of many through these Focus programs. It's your contributions, however small, that make this show possible.